Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this special community briefing. I'm Keith Black, and I chair the Jewish Leadership Council, which is the umbrella body for our community's charitable organisations. We've called this briefing in order to update you on how we're handling the war in Israel and its consequences here in the UK. The events of October the 7th continue to send shock reverberations around the entire Jewish world. Our community has shown huge support for Israel, for the plight of the hostages, for citizens who have become refugees in their own country, for soldiers who have fallen, and for families bereaving the loss of loved ones both in Israel and in Gaza. We pray for a speedy end to this war and that it not be further extended to the north or indeed to any other border. We all know that Israel is fighting for the right of the Jewish people to live freely and in peace in their own sovereign nation, and that there are extremely dark forces attempting to delegitimize and destroy that country. I have every confidence that with her huge technological superiority, with her immensely resilient and determined population, and not least with the substantial support of allies in the West, that Israel will emerge from this war with safe and secure borders, enabling her population to return to a normal way of life. And here too, in the UK, we are facing a new reality. And here too, we are fighting back. For 8 long months now, our communal organisations and our entire community have been working to protect everyone from this horrible level of anti-Semitism that so many of us are experiencing on so many levels. So, in February of this year, the JLC, together with communal partners, launched its Forge the Future community plan, an ambitious yet achievable set of initiatives for the entire community to get behind and ensure the future of Jewish life in this country. It has 4 main themes. Firstly, we must empower and support the next generation who have come under such enormous pressure. We've seen the hostility that Jewish students face on campuses and in non-Jewish schools, and we're supporting UJS and others in their attempts to convince those responsible for running these establishments that discrimination against Jews is unacceptable, and that they have a duty of care to Jewish students that they are currently not fulfilling. And of course, all of this undoubtedly has an impact on the next generation's relationship with Israel, which is getting more and more complicated. So together with them, we're working on new ideas for engagement, and we will use this crisis to inspire new leadership and invigorate our youth to stay resilient, determined, committed, courageous, and knowledgeable. Secondly, we do not believe that this country is an inherently anti-Semitic country. It has a proud history of empowering its Jewish community, who have put so much back into the country. But our allies today are sometimes behind closed doors, doors that we know will open to us if we ask. And we are making those requests, not out of fear, but out of confidence that our Jewish values are values shared by the nation, and that this nation will allow its Jews to live freely and safely and not in fear. Thirdly, we're working to ensure fair media coverage. We know that irresponsible media can have and does have a direct impact on the community and how people feel. We're not asking for things to be omitted or to be sugar-coated, but we are asking, demanding for fairness, accuracy, and balance. The fourth part of our plan is to ensure that our legal rights are enforced. We've set up structures to ensure that our community is well advised, as far too many bad faith actors are using lawfare against us, and we must ensure that the community is well placed to meet the challenge where necessary and defend our rights. So we're implementing all these strategies and others with our colleagues across the community. We are, as a community, hugely fortunate to have a wide network of charities led by a committed lay leadership and managed by a highly professional directorate. The Board of Deputies, whose new president, Phil Rosenberg, we'll be hearing from later, the wonderful CST, UJS doing a magnificent job, UJIS supporting our friends in Israel, BICOM on their communication work, and countless others are working together, joined up, and in close collaboration to ensure that strong Jewish future in this country. And I'm delighted that they are joining us to update us tonight. There are scores of other organizations, JLC members and non-members, individuals and activists and funders who have done and will continue to do a tremendous amount to support the community. A big thank you to each of you. These are difficult days, the most challenging for a generation. But as Jews always have done, we will rise to the challenge, proud in our Judaism. We will face down our enemies and be courageous. We will not stay silent. And we will ensure a strong Jewish future in this country for our children and our grandchildren. I would now like to hand over to my colleague, Mark Gardner, Chief Executive Officer of the CST. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mark Gardner and I'm privileged to be the Chief Executive of CST, Community Security Trust. CST's job is to keep you safe so that you and your families can lead the Jewish lives of your choice. I'll explain what we've done since October the 7th and what lies ahead. Now, when the war began, I spoke on various communal briefings, just like this one. I was asked to give reassurance, but I explained I couldn't, because reassurance sounds like a guarantee that nothing will happen, which we all know it can. But I did assure you, I promised you, that CST would do everything we could to protect you, and that is exactly what we've done. I said that our fully trained security volunteers and our physical security infrastructure built at all the schools, all the shuls, was already in place for exactly this reason, because we know the reality of anti-Semitism and of terrorism, including Hamas and Hezbollah. We urged you to find the strength to continue sending your children to school, which you did and have done ever since. Remember some of the fear-mongering that spread on social media? We asked you not to do our enemies' work for them, and very quickly you learned that lesson and stopped spreading those false rumors. Above all, we said that we would be strong for you, and we asked you to be strong for us in return, and you have been. And for all the fear of the first month or so, there's now an absolute determination to stand and be counted. Our community saw the need to stand up for itself, and that's exactly what it's now done. CST has been so proud to play our part in enabling that, including by protecting unprecedented demonstrations of communal determination. In London, we had tens of thousands of people in Trafalgar Square calling for the release of the hostages. And then even more joined the campaign march against anti-Semitism that finished in front of Parliament. Manchester, Leeds, other communities have also demonstrated, also protected by CST. Hundreds upon hundreds of Jewish men and women have joined CST in recent months as volunteer security officers. Every person was individually vetted and went through intensive training courses, security procedures, physical self-defense, emergency trauma, first aid, CST now has over 2,000 volunteers. We have empowered our community and you empowered us. That's why there isn't any difference between CST and our community. We are all one and the same. Now, CST's staff back up these volunteers from offices in London, Manchester and Leeds. We've had to take on 20 new staff. Our budget is up by over £2 million. It includes more equipment for more volunteers, more donations for community buildings, for better security doors, fencing, etc. and CCTVs feeding into our 24/7 National Control Centre. Now, I promised you that CST would continue speaking responsibly and with authority on our subjects of anti-Semitism, terrorism, policing. We cut through the noise with sober facts and analyses. Anti-Semitic incidents are running at record levels. There has been some violence, but overwhelmingly this is verbal abuse and threatening behaviour. Since October 7th, CST's dealt with over 4,500 anti-Semitic incidents, either reported to us by yourselves or by police forces across the country. And we've taken well over 2,500 other reports that show suspicious behaviour or criminality, but not anti-Semitism. So it's over 7,000 reports since October the 7th. And you know the worst of it was in the first week of the war, which proves yet again that anti-Semitism is not a response to what Israel does or is alleged to do. Instead, anti-Semites use the Middle East as an excuse to act out their Jew hatred. But it's Jewish death and vulnerability that excites them the most. Now, throughout this war, colleagues and I have had a constant stream of meetings with police and government at every level. It's impossible for me to adequately explain just how much consultation and cooperation there is constantly between CST, police, government ministers and relevant government departments. And I know that our community feels the police should do more, and I share some of that, but they do a lot of things very well, which by definition you then don't see. There are terrorism cases right now that came from the police or from CST reported to the police. For months, police were stationed in our 24/7 control centre, but now it's mainly over Shabbat. The policing on anti-Israel demonstrations is much better now than it was in October and November. People are being arrested for things that previously would never have occurred. In previous wars, demonstrations had widespread violence and support for terrorism by Hamas and Hezbollah. None of that now happens. Our relationship with government saw their annual community security grant raised by a further £3 million to £18 million. It's now in place for the next 3 years, and Keir Starmer is also committed to it. That money is managed by CST for the Home Office. It goes to every school, schools and many other communal locations to pay not for CST, but for guards from commercial security companies. None of it could be done without CST being across all of our communities. And whatever happens next with the war in Gaza or maybe Lebanon, we know the impact here in Britain. More anti-Semitism, more threats of terrorism, and a deepening sense of Jews being squeezed out of the public space, whether it's children in playgrounds or public transport, young adults on university campuses, or Jewish men and women in their places of work and leisure. CST's job is to understand and fight these physical, political, and social realities. Our volunteers, staff, and trustees choose to be your front line, led by our chair, Sir Gerald Ronson. CST will always be defined by our name, community, and security, and trust. Those are values that drive everything we do. The community is what we serve. Every single British Jew and everything that you make happen, all of it constituting our community. As I've said, CST is not somehow separate to our community. What happens to you happens to us. Community gives CST our people, our resources, our legitimacy and purpose. Security is what we do. The physical security, the research expertise, and the political and intellectual defence of our community. Trust, fundamental. The trust that our community, the police and the government have in us to carry out this mission. That trust, every time we protect our community, every time we help someone because they or their child suffered a racist attack, every time we will do all that we can to deserve your trust. That is my commitment to all of you, and it is CST's pledge in the continuing service of our community. From day one of this war, our ethos and our message to you has been, be Jewish. We have every right to be Jews and to lead our way of life. We will keep working with all of you to achieve that goal. But it's Jewish students who are at the sharpest end of things. So I'm proud to now hand over to Sammy and Ed. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Edward Isaacs, and I'm the outgoing president of the Union of Jewish Students for the UK and Ireland. This year truly has been a year like no other for Jewish students on campuses across the UK and Ireland. Jewish students post-October the 7th have experienced this six-fold increase in anti-Semitism on campus, which sadly has represented the biggest crisis on campus in terms of anti-Semitism in a generation. We all know too well that Jewish students have faced death threats, they face physical assault, and that their property has been damaged too. But sadly, with the rise of the encampment protest movement as well towards the end of the year, what we can only describe now is that Jewish students are facing a climate of fear on campus, whereby regardless of a Jewish student, whether they've been a victim of an anti-Semitic incident or not, they are all too often sadly feeling that campus is not a place for them. Vice-Chancellors too have all too often failed to heed our practical advice and guidance on how they can best support Jewish students during these challenging times. And what's clear to us is that sadly, to be anti-Semitic is not socially expensive on campus as it stands right now. But despite all of this, UJS has remained steadfast in our mission to lead, defend and enrich Jewish life on campus. And at this evening's briefing, I just wanted to take a few minutes to reflect upon our work over the previous year to ensure that Jewish students can not only survive on campus, but really can thrive living meaningful Jewish lives. And first, education has been at the forefront of all of our work post-October the 7th. In the immediate aftermath of October the 7th, we worked with leaders of Israeli society, key educators on the ground here in the UK as well, working both in universities and in schools as well to make sure that Jewish students knew what was going on the ground in Israel, but also were cognizant of the history and the challenges facing them too. We subsequently then flew over two survivors of the Nova Festival to speak to over 500 students across the UK to ensure that they understood the stories of what happened on that harrowing day on October the 7th, so that they are so incredibly well informed to then take these messages forward onto campus. We also took over 40 Jewish student leaders to Israel to ensure that they could see the reality on the ground and that they could understand both from Israeli and Palestinian leaders in society about the challenges facing them too. But we also recognise as well the importance of educating our non-Jewish peers about the challenges that Jewish students are facing on campus. And this year we have massively expanded our anti-Semitism awareness training, and we have trained over 3,000 non-Jewish campus leaders so they can understand, recognise and beat anti-Semitism and be allies to Jewish students during these challenging times. And we've also trained over 40 vice-chancellors too. Second is representation. And we have worked with key stakeholders in the higher education sector so that Jewish student voices are heard in the corridors of power. Our message that Jewish students have simply had enough of anti-Semitism on campus has been heard loud and clear by almost every Vice-Chancellor across the UK and Ireland, by the leader of the opposition and the Labour Party, and also by the Conservative Party too, and at 10 Downing Street where we sat with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and explained to him the challenges Jewish students are facing, while we also then sat with Vice-Chancellors too as well in Downing Street to make sure that they understood the practical advice and guidance they need to take heed of to ensure that Jewish students can live meaningful Jewish lives on campus. Third is funding, because we recognised very quickly that the demand for Jewish student life increased like never seen before, because Jewish students were craving Jewish spaces. And we made sure that regardless if a JSOC didn't feel comfortable doing an event on campus or not, that they always had a space to hold their events in. We've made sure that no JSOC is going without the core funding to ensure that they can put on every Friday night, every educational event, and every party that they wish, so that there is as few barriers as possible to accessing Jewish student life on campus. Next is fighting anti-Semitism, and we have quite literally supported hundreds of victims of anti-Semitism, whether it be navigating complaints processes on campuses or so much more. We will never leave a Jewish student alone as they are navigating the often complex higher education system of being a victim of anti-Semitism and making a complaint about it and seeing justice delivered. But we also recognise as well that Jewish student life cannot merely just survive, but has to really thrive. And fifth, we have continued to focus on enabling Jewish pride and celebration on campus. We've supported and funded over 18,000 Friday night dinners this year, and we will continue to do so over the next few years to come. We had our largest ever Jewish student convention this year, the largest cross-communal Jewish student Shabbaton outside of America, with over 400 students signing up to enjoy and engage in our programming. We've directly supported Jewish students in mainstream schools, working with our partners at Maccabi and many others as well, to make sure that they can enjoy their Jewish societies too. And we've had the largest ever Jewish Student Awards this year, recognising the phenomenal response and resilience of Jewish students during such a difficult year. But finally, we have remained steadfast in our welfare support to Jewish students. On October the 9th, we opened the UJS Welfare Hotline, and sadly since then we've seen well over 1,000 calls of Jewish students who need support, but often at times simply just want someone to turn to and want to have a conversation with about the situation that they find themselves in. And we will continue that for as long as it is needed. I recognise that problems are going to continue and are continuing on campus, and that for many parents and prospective students watching, many of you may have been to open days recently whereby you would have seen protests and so much more. And we are resolute in our message to Vice-Chancellors that they have to ensure that all prospective students and parents feel as welcome and included on their campuses as any other prospective Jewish student, any other prospective student or parent. And we will continue to push that message to make sure that you can get the campus experience that you want. And I think it's important to say as well that we don't expect these problems to quickly go away over the summer, and that we do expect these problems to continue into next year. But we are clear in our work over the summer to ensure that Vice-Chancellors and university leaders are clear and cognizant of the fact of the challenges that Jewish students are facing, and we are already beginning to write and engage with university leaders to understand what their plans are to safeguard Jewish students during their welcome weeks and freshers weeks, to ensure that you have the confidence of the universities that you will be attending or that your sons and daughters will be attending to. So in closing, this truly has been a year like no other, but it's been a year like no other as well because not only because of what Jewish students have faced, but how they've responded. And what gives me hope for the future is that Jewish students continue to see value in living meaningful Jewish lives on campus. It's been my greatest pleasure and honour to be UJS president this year, and I look forward to seeing so many Jewish students have a phenomenal and better time on campus over the year ahead. I'm now going to hand over to my successor, Sammy, to touch upon her plans for the year ahead and all of the exciting kind of bits of Jewish student life to get involved in. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing all of you soon.
My name is Sammy and I'm the incoming president of UJS. Over the next year, we will focus on empowering Jewish students to live proud and vibrant Jewish lives on campus with the support of UJS by leading, defending and enriching Jewish students as the voice of Jewish students. Leading. We are dedicated to developing the next generation of leaders in our community. Through training JSOC committees and our leadership fellowship, we are equipping Jewish students with the skills and confidence to be the next leaders of our community. This includes taking our leadership fellowship to sixth form students to engage them with UJS before they reach university. Defending. By expanding our anti-Semitism awareness training from 3,000 campus leaders to 10,000 through our Train the Trainer model, we are building allies to ensure that campus is a place where Jewish students feel safe and that it becomes socially expensive to be anti-Semitic on campus. Additionally, through our campaigns team, we are supporting student-led rallies and campaigns, ensuring that Jewish students have a strong voice while being supported by UJS. Whilst we are in these challenging times, At UJS, we will constantly be enriching Jewish students to live meaningful Jewish lives where they can be proud of their Jewish identity. This includes, in the next year, having 2 additional Shabbatons alongside our convention and creating and fostering regional links between JSOCs to encourage collaboration. As the voice of Jewish students, we are working on our plans for the first 100 days of the new government, as well as writing to university leaders to ask what their plans are for Welcome Weeks. This is to ensure that Jewish student safety on campus is at the forefront of all of their minds. At UJS, we do and will continue to advocate for Jewish students. We know that times are tough, but because of UJS and our support of JSOCs, we will always ensure Jewish students will still be able to live meaningful Jewish lives on campus. Look out for our Parents' Evenings in Septembers, our applications for the Leadership Fellowship, and as always, our welfare hotline will remain open. And now I hand over to Richard from BICOM.
Good afternoon. This is Richard Pater, the Director of BICOM, speaking to you here from Jerusalem. BICOM focuses on research analysis of Israel and the region, and I'm going to share a few of our latest assessments. I'll start with the north of Israel, which is, for policymakers here, the top priority at the moment. There is growing concern that since the 8th of October, Israel has been under relentless attack from Hezbollah. This is being led and directed by the Iranian axis and forms the top order threat to Israel. Since the 8th of October, we've seen over 4,500 rockets strike northern Israel, both in terms of simple rockets, accurate guided missiles, drones, and other range of weapons. Now, let me be clear. Israel has no conflict with the state of Lebanon at all. In fact, back in 2000, Israel pulled out of their security zone to the UN-endorsed Blue Line, which was recognized by the international community. Then again in 2006, after the Second Lebanon War, Israel agreed to Resolution 1701, again UN-endorsed, which would ensure that Hezbollah would be removed south of the Litani River, approximately 10 kilometers in southern Lebanon. In the last 18 years, we have seen Hezbollah continuously violate that agreement. In fact, it was just last summer where I was with journalists up on Israel's northern border, and I took photos of Hezbollah operatives in uniform taking photos of us. So the threat is real. The Hezbollah have long produced propaganda that they would attempt to invade the Galilee. In fact, it was a Hezbollah playbook that Hamas used on October the 7th. Now, from recent conversations with Israeli intelligence, they are cautious to state that war is not inevitable. In fact, it's only 50-50, which are pretty horrific odds when you consider the potential devastation which could lead to an all-out war with Lebanon and to a wider regional conflict. But there is still hope that a robust implementation of Resolution 1701 could see the international community exert pressure on Lebanon and on Hezbollah and remove that threat. But that needs to be a reinforced deal to ensure that Israelis are willing to return to their homes. Hundreds of homes in the last few months have been destroyed by Hezbollah attacks, and this is not a situation which is acceptable to continue. Related to that, of course, is the fighting in the south, which we've now seen for almost 9 months. According to the latest Israeli assessment, they think that between 2 to 4 weeks, the fighting will be over in the southern Gaza Strip and over the city of Rafah, that the Hamas brigades there will be decommissioned and no longer serve a full military threat. We should be conscious that that doesn't mean an end to terrorism. Over the Israeli estimates, but that between 30 and 40 of the Hamas fighting force that they had pre-October have been incapacitated. They still remain a lot of fighters and terrorists available to carry out attacks. But Israel is looking to transition to what they refer to as phase 3 of the fighting, which will see the IDF troops withdrawing from the population centres of the Palestinian areas and return to a buffer zone for 2 purposes. One, in order to launch targeted, precise operations against real imminent threats, and also to give that sense of assurance to the residents of the south that they can return to their homes. Now, with all of this, there is still the concern for the 120 Israeli hostages that remain in captivity. The latest understanding that I have from political sources says that Netanyahu is now ready to do a deal, and even at the risk of potentially going against his current coalition partners, who the right wing have threatened that if a deal included the end of the fighting, they would pull out of this government. But Netanyahu seems to understand now that he would be able to do that theoretically under the guise of a minority government being given a protective safety net by members of the opposition. Now, just because Israel agrees doesn't mean that Hamas necessarily agrees to this. And in fact, I hear analysts are divided of whether Hamas really wants to do a deal. Yes, they gain a lot of prestige by releasing the prisoners, the terrorists that are unrepentant murderers in Israeli prisons. But at the same time, the hostages represent the most real insurance policy to allow the Hamas regime to perpetuate itself and still continue the day after. So there is great concern that Hamas, who are themselves divided between the internal leadership inside the Gaza Strip and the external leadership, are really prepared to do a deal. As I mentioned, the Israeli politics is a fractious place right now, following the withdrawal of the government by both ministers Gantz and Eisenkot and the withdrawal of the National Unity Party. There are various other fissures within this government, infighting amongst themselves. I mentioned the hard right are pushing for Netanyahu and could use any deal as a pretext to leave the government. We saw yesterday the Israeli High Court passed by a unanimous decision to insist that the ultra-Orthodox need to begin to serve in the IDF, and that is another fissure which could lead to the breakup of this government. There are also disputes between the political and military echelons, which is a great concern to Israeli society. Fourth area of concern is Israel's economy, that the war is a very costly affair, both in terms of resources of the army, in terms of the reservists, and in terms of paying the compensation for the residents who have been displaced, both in the north and the south. It is anticipated that the next budget will have to see an increase in taxation. There is talk of a rise of 20% of VAT, as well as increases in income tax as well. And there is an ongoing threat of international organizations and investors reassessing their investments in Israel because of the volatility and the threat of the Iranian axis. And as well as the Hezbollah that leads that axis, there are continuous threats from other fronts, including from Iraq, from Syria, from the south in the Houthis, as well as the West Bank, which remains at a very on edge. If I can tell you anecdotally, here in Jerusalem, we were on high alert. When I left this neighborhood, we saw the patrols checking every car because of the concern of a ticking bomb terror attack in Jerusalem yesterday. So the threat here to the population is palpable. One final thought on the diplomatic front, and Israel appreciates their strong alliance with the US, with the UK and other European countries as well, who continue to show, at least behind the scenes and privately, steadfast support. Israel would be very happy for that support to be articulated even louder, especially in the threats that it faces from the prosecution in the ICC and the ICJ. And finally, there have been out of all Israel's alliances within the region, although this has been a very testing time for Israel's alliances, particularly with the Abraham Accord countries, but with others as well. No one has removed their representation of embassies from Israel, of any of the Arab countries, and there is a still understanding that there is a shared enemy in Iran, and that therefore the region needs to see Israel win, and they all have a vested interest in that. So here's to looking forward. Please consult the BICOM website or be in touch if you have any other questions and queries that we can help with. I'm Israel Chai. I now hand you over to Emily from the UJIA.
My name is Emily Pater and I am the UJIA Israel Director, and I would like to share with you today some reflections about what life is like here in Israel. 8 months after the war, the level of uncertainty and anxiety remains incredibly high. What does it mean to be a country at war? We wake up in the morning, we check the news, and for a moment we hold our breaths to see if reported in the news is the phrase approved for publication. And that's the phrase that is used when the army shares news of either a death of a soldier or those severely injured. This war is very, very personal. Everyone knows somebody affected. Everyone knows somebody called up to serve, some for the second or the third time. In my small neighbourhood alone, there have been at least 5 soldiers' deaths, people murdered and kidnapped on October the 7th. It's the teacher at my kids' school. It's the son of the owner of the local grocery. It's friends and it's neighbours. It's been 264 days since October the 7th. But for those communities directly affected, for the families of the hostages and the bereaved, it is still October the 7th. We all live in a constant state of flux with the key questions that there are no answers to. When will the war in Gaza end and how will it end? Will the hostages come home and how many will come home and when will they come home? Will there be war in the north? What does this mean if there is? Practically, what does it mean? Will other fronts open up in Israel and beyond? And all of this, of course, is against a very complex politics of war and domestic issues. In Israel today, it's really a country where there are 2 realities. There's one reality, if you live in the centre, where life functions in near normal fashion of people going about on their daily lives, of course, against a backdrop of significant emotional anxiety, concern for our soldiers, deep, deep anguish over the fate and the state of our hostages. And there's another reality, which is if you live in a border community, whether in the south or in the north, where rockets and drones continue to rain down. The reality differs if you're sleeping in your own bed at night or if you're evacuated. Tens of thousands of people remain outside of their homes, many in hotels still, unsure when they're going to go home. For the residents of the north, it's becoming increasingly clear that they will not be going home for some time. There are some unofficial statements being shared privately that these people will not be going home till after the Chagim, and some people even saying until the end of the calendar year. And let's just pause on that for a moment and think about that. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who will potentially be outside of their homes for more than a year. 2 weeks ago, I spent time with the mayor of Kiryat Shmona and the youth of Kiryat Shmona. Now, this is the first time in Israel's history that Kiryat Shmona, a town in the far north, has been evacuated. That is 22,000 people out of a total population, that town of 24,000 people, that have been evacuated. Their residents scattered across Israel in multiple locations, in fact, in 426 locations across Israel. There is complete uncertainty for them when they can go home, how they can go home, if they can go home, and frankly, how many are going to go home. There are some estimations that the mayor shared with me of 46% of the residents considering not going back. And let's just think about what does that mean for a town that is of strategic geographic importance on Israel's northern border. The summer holidays have started here. Secondary schools broke up last week and primary school age are going to break up on Sunday. Now, the long summer holidays in Israel is always a bit of a challenge, certainly for working parents. But for this year in particular, it's going to have a massive impact on those families who are either evacuated or those families that remain in their homes but live under rocket fire. There is a need to keep the kids safe during these times, to keep them occupied, to keep them out of harm's way. And let's remember that you're talking about thousands of children that, first of all, finished the year with massive learning gaps because they hardly went to school this year. Either they were unable to, they didn't feel comfortable to, or some kids just simply wouldn't get out of their hotel rooms or didn't want to leave their homes. And also, there are many kids displaying significant risk behaviours, very worrying increases of the use of alcohol and drugs and incidences of violence and inappropriate other behaviours. The amount of kids that were at risk before has increased significantly, and the summer is a time where kids who are not occupied and who are not cared for, those risk factors can be even that much greater. So over the next few months, UJIA's efforts are going to be focused significantly on helping keep those children safe, keeping them occupied and in secure frameworks to get through the next few months. And at the same time, we continue to work to support other areas, such as small business owners who are really struggling as a result of the war. Many of them have been called up, have taken part in reserve duty, and their businesses are struggling, and we're working to help them keep them afloat. We are also caring for the residents of southern kibbutzim and working to help them rebuild their lives and their communities through programmatic and capital support. When I reflect back on the past 8 months, 2 rays of light really stand out for me. The first is about how civil society has come together from across the spectrum, all groups, including Arab Israelis and also the ultra-Orthodox. They've come together in solidarity to care for one another, to provide each other whatever we may need. And the other ray of light is how Israel and the diaspora have reconnected and re-engaged with one another with a shared understanding of how we need each other and how important the connection is between people living in Israel and people living in Jewish communities around the world. And I hope going forward that is something that we hold on to for the long term. I'd like to now hand over to Phil Rosenberg.
Thank you, Emily, and good evening, everyone. My name is Phil Rosenberg, and I am the newly elected president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the national representative body of the UK Jewish community. And I'm the youngest president in the board's 264-year history. It is a difficult time right now, an inflection point. And I started out my presidency by setting out 5 key missions on which we'll be working over the coming years. 1, fight anti-Semitism. 2, stand up for peace and security in Israel and the Middle East. 3, defend our religious freedoms. 4, make our community more united, more inclusive, and more outward looking. And 5, celebrate our faith, heritage, and culture as British Jews. Now, all of you will be aware that there's a general election on at the moment, and the board has produced a Jewish manifesto available on our website that sets out the key interests and concerns of our community. We've also, working with the Jewish Leadership Council and local partners, put on 30 hustings around the country. This means that our future political representatives are well aware of the things that are important to us. And utilising the Jewish manifesto, we'll be holding to account whichever government is elected over the coming years. The Jewish manifesto and all our work at the moment has been forged in the shadow of the 7th of October, the ongoing war of defence against Hamas, and the massive rise in anti-Semitism in the UK and around the world. Of course, constantly in our hearts are the 120 people still held hostage by Hamas, and we will leave no stone unturned until we bring them all home. From the 5th to the 7th of October, the organisations on this call and others too will be putting on a series of events to mark the anniversary of the 7th of October attacks. We'll be inviting the whole community to those, hopefully to celebrate the release of the hostages, but if not, to stand with Israel in its time of need together. I want to particularly address the current rise in anti-Semitism. Over the coming months and years, the Board of Deputies will be working on 4 main tracks to tackle this problem. First of all, we will undertake a comprehensive review of hate crime legislation, policing and prosecution, including public order, to make sure our community is protected. Second, we will look at a review of civil society. So many parts of civil society have failed our community since the 7th of October, whether that's universities, the media, social media, professional bodies, cultural institutions, sporting institutions. We'll be making recommendations for change in each of them to make sure our community feels included and supported by them. Third of all, we'll be looking to tackle extremism, particularly Islamist extremism, but also far right and far left extremism. Extremism is not a problem for Jews or for Israel alone. It is a problem for all of society. And we need to build an optimistic alliance of people of all faiths and no faiths to tackle it together. We will also be looking to massively enhance our education, training and interfaith outreach to inoculate people against the virus of anti-Semitism. I know that things have been hard over the last 9 months, but we as a community have resilience in our DNA, and I am determined that we will come back stronger. Thank you, good evening, and Am Yisrael Chai.